Right, I'm Stephen Wilkins. I'm the CEO of the Child Safe Packaging Group, which is a trade association consisting of members of the supply industry for child-resistant packaging and a number of users of child-resistant packaging. I also chair a number of standard-setting committees, the CEN and the ISO committees responsible, and I am the Managing Director of Davis Development and Testing Limited, which is a UCAS-accredited testing laboratory, and we test child-resistant packaging and certify it for effectiveness. Now, there are a total of 4 standards here in the UK and the European Union dealing with child-resistant packaging, and there's a regulation that deals with child-resistant packaging in the United States of America. I guess I'll tell you what child-resistant packaging is. It's packaging that's difficult for a child under 5 to open within a reasonable period, but not difficult for an adult to use properly. Now, I say under 5, I'm really looking at a much younger age, because children that need the protection of child-resistant packaging are generally 2 to 3 years old. Now, the standards, which I'll go through for you shortly, have 2 tests, a child test and an adult test. The child test looks at a variable sample of children aged 42 to 51 months, that's 3.5 to 4.25, and it asks those children to open a supposedly child-resistant container. Now, the children work in pairs and they work in their school or playgroup, and they are supervised by a team of at least 2 of the research staff. They have 5 minutes. They're given a pack and asked to try and open it. And they have 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, they view a silent demonstration with no particular emphasis drawn to any one action. And then they're asked to, again, to try and open the pack, and they're given another 5 minutes. These 2 periods are called the before and after demonstration periods. Now, for the pack to pass, it has to be 80% successful. Now, generally, that doesn't sound particularly onerous, does it? But it basically means, 1 in 5 can open it. But that, in fact, doesn't happen at all. Generally, successful packs achieve a score of far higher than 80%. Now, we use sequential testing, which is a Bayesian model, where the results of one trial determine the number or the positioning for the next trial. So, in fact, a good pack can pass a test with a sample of only 30 children. A medium and mediocre pack will take about 50 to 70 children, but when your sample size starts to exceed 70, generally something is fundamentally wrong with the pack. Now, how does it work and where's it come from? During the post-war 50s and 60s, that great decade of consumerism, many drugs were, and over-the-counter remedies found their way into homes. They were tremendously useful. We had a lot of household products, automotive products in homes. And there were a number of child ingestions. And these were tragic, extremely worrying. So in the early 70s, child-resistant packaging was first developed, and the first child-resistant pack was, I'm sure you're very familiar now with the push down and turn closure. You push it down and you turn it round, and it works on a ratchet. And the thing that makes it child-resistant is that it asks the child to do 2 opposing actions simultaneously. It also gives the child what the ergonomists call a false affordance. Now, an affordance is the signs that anything gives you that tells you how it works. A good example is a door. You know whether it's push or pull because of the handle, the hinges, etc. Now, to a child, a bottle top, if you will, can be taken off by either pulling it or turning it, but never pushing it. So that immediately gives them a confusing series of signs of semiotics, and it is the most successful, has been the most successful child-resistant packaging system. Child-resistant packaging came about in the early 70s in response to the influx of massive consumer products, which were useful, wonderful, changed our quality of life in the 50s and 60s, but of course, if ingested by children, were potentially extremely harmful. Now, you create child-resistant packaging by asking a child to do things that they cannot assimilate. In the case of the popular push and turn child-resistant closure, you're asking a child to do two things simultaneously that are not just opposing, but also contrary to their knowledge of how things work. Right, how do we test for child resistance? Now, to be child resistant, a child resistant pack, to be child resistant has to be tested under one of three standards here in the UK and the European Union. The standards consist of two tests, a child test and an adult test. Now, the child test is to establish whether children can open them. The adult test is to make sure that adults can open them. It's pointless creating a child-resistant pack that nobody else can open. The age of children that we are looking at, the danger age, are children between 2 and 3 years old. Terrible twos. But the size of the sample of children with which we work, the age of that sample is 42 to 51 months, 3.5 to 4.25. There are a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is that the younger age group would just be too difficult to work with. We need the cooperation of the older age group. And secondly, there is an ethical problem of showing children at the danger age how to open a child-resistant container. Now, the child test consists of two periods. A pre-demonstration period, 5 minutes, where children are asked to open a pack. Then they witness a silent demonstration with no particular emphasis given to any one action, and then they have a further 5 minutes. Now, to be successful, the pack must achieve 80% success. In other words, 80% of the children in the test panel must fail to open it. In reality, because sequential testing is used to reduce the sample size, the success in many cases approaches 100% and certainly will sit in the high 90s. The adult test is a perfectly simple test. 100 adults, after 5 minutes familiarization, have to open and properly reclose the pack in 1 minute. And the adult panel is a panel of 100 adults aged 50 to 70, 70% female. And we have to achieve 90% success for the pack to be child resistant. That's a very broad description to how it works. Well, first of all, it isn't the closure that's compliant, although the closure is the actuator of child resistance. A pack is tested being a closure and a container. So there's no such thing as a child resistant closure. There's a closure that's designed to be child resistant when tested with a suitable container. If the container's changed, a retest is necessary. So how do we know? Well, clearly a supplier and manufacturer will display with the closure a certificate of compliance. Now, a certificate of compliance is given after a successful test, and testing can only be undertaken by a laboratory that is accredited by, in the UK, UCAS, but the accreditation body in its own country, under the laboratory standard ISO 17025. Now, the standards for child-resistant packaging, I might as well mention them now. For the common reclosable child-resistant pack, the standard is ISO 8317 2015 is the latest iteration. That standard has been with us now for 48 years, just about, in various forms. The latest is the 2015 standard. Now, that covers reclosable packaging, as I've mentioned. For non-reclosable packaging, like blister packs, there are two standards, one for medicines, one for non-medicines. EN 14375 2016 is the medicines standard, and EN 862, again 2016, is a standard for non-reclosable packaging for non-medicines. Examples of those are horticultural or gardening products, and of course medicines. Examples are the very, very popular blister packs. Just reverting for a moment for reclosable packaging, examples are, as I've mentioned, the common push down and turn closure and a squeeze and turn closure, which you'll see on very many bleach bottles. The push down and turn closure is particularly successful because, again, as I've mentioned, it asks children to do two things that are counterintuitive to that child because it's contrary to the child's worldview as to how things work. Here in the UK, and in fact in most other European Union countries, until the early 1990s, there was no standard for blister packs. There was a mistaken assumption that blister packs were inherently child resistant. We in the Child Safe Packaging Group actually managed to disprove that in 1995, and after a tremendous amount of effort, we got BSI to publish a standard for testing blister packs for child resistance in 1989. This became a European standard in the early 1990s. Now, the problem with testing a blister pack for child resistance is what constitutes an opening. In the USA, there's a regulation as opposed to a standard. It's quite often referred to as a US standard, but in fact it's a regulation. I'll probably deal with that one in a few moments. However, when you extract medicines from a blister pack, what is a failure? What's a failure of the packaging? What is an opening? Nobody could agree. The CEN committee and the BSI committee concerned did not have suitable pharmacology expertise on board, neither did it pretend to. It was a committee of packaging experts. And we decided, we being the committee, we decided eventually that we'd set an acceptance level of more than 8 units. In other words, we would say that the pack had failed when the child test panel member extracted or exposed more than 8 units. Now, in fact, there are numerous products that are dangerous in quantities of considerably less than 8 units. So the industry took up the reins here and decided that whilst it would use the standard, it would know the potential toxicity of its products. A manufacturer would know how toxic its products could be. So the industry then developed packaging that was child resistant at levels of less than more than 8 units. Let's call more than 8 units F8 plus. We can then go all the way down to F1, so we can consider F1 to be a failure. When 1 unit is extracted, we say that pack has failed at F1, F2, F3, etc. But the ultimate acceptance level is F8 plus. In 1995, the pharmaceutical industry and the then Medicines Control Agency, now the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, they published an initiative called the Patient Pack Initiative. This was very, very laudable, and it had a number of objectives. Probably the most important one was to create patient information leaflets and ensure that every medicine that was purchased or prescribed or dispensed to a consumer was accompanied by a leaflet that gave information about this medicine. Gone were the days of just keep taking the pills. However, the Patient Pack Initiative favoured blister packs and made claims that they were inherently child resistant. We, myself and a number of colleagues, did not believe this assertion, so we put a number of them to the test and found that they were not child resistant. After substantial lobbying, and 4 years later in 1999, BSI published a standard to test blister packs for child resistance. This became a European standard in the early 90s and has been revised and developed since then. The latest iteration is, of course, EN in the UK, BSEN 14375, 2016. I formed Davis Development and Testing Limited, which is a UCAS accredited laboratory, accredited under ISO 17025. I established that in 2002 because I believed that there was an ongoing need for more facilities to test packaging for child resistance. Now, I've mentioned the three standards, CEN and ISO. There is another standard, an ISO standard, which is ISO 13127. ISO 13127 is a mechanical testing standard to test by mechanical means the effect of minor changes on a pack that's previously been certified and found compliant with ISO 8317. Now, 13127 is subject at present to revision. It was published in 2012, and in the intervening period, we and various of our colleagues have discovered areas within it that are in need of change. So we're presently revising that standard. Now, I chair the ISO technical subcommittee responsible for this, which is ISO TC122 SC3, and that is performance packaging. And I also chair the CEN committee, that's the European standard setting body, which is CEN TC261 SC5. And we are working to revise the CEN ISO 13127 standard to make it into a better and more workable tool. Now, here's the important bit if you are exporting to the United States or distributing in the United States. In the USA, although we refer to it as the American standard or the US standard, in fact, child-resistant packaging has to comply with a regulation. The regulation is 16 CFR 1700.20. That's Chapter 16 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, what's the difference between a regulation and a standard? A standard isn't a set of rules. A standard is a set of concepts from which we derive our own rules. An international standard has to be workable in the UK, in France, in Canada, in Vietnam, in Myanmar, in India, in Australia, every country in the world. It has to be written so that it's useful and workable by every culture in the world. A regulation is mandatory. It's like the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. You can't say to the policeman, "It was a fine day and I was feeling happy." It won't wash. A regulation has to be adhered to. A regulation is generally framed to suit the culture in the country, in the territory that it seeks to regulate. In the case of 16 CFR, it is designed for the United States of America. It is extremely prescriptive. Now, we do test packaging for that regulation as well here in the UK. We're recognised by the American Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC. What's the difference? Well, other than minor changes, emphasis on different areas of rigour, very, very little. Sequential testing is used. The 2 periods that children test the packaging for, 2 5-minute periods, are pretty much the same. There is, though, one difference, and this is a very telling difference. After the silent demonstration, the research supervisor tells the child panel members, "Use your teeth if you want to." And this is an area where the child is prompted to open it in a particular fashion, because the regulators in the United States recognise that children do use their teeth, that a child's bite force is about 25 pounds force, whereas their squeeze force between thumb and forefinger is only a couple of pounds, and that if a pack is going to fail, it will fail by being bitten. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, the standards that I've mentioned, 8317, 14375, etc., they last forever. So how do they cope with dimension creep? The change of tooling, change of material, etc. One of my colleagues in Germany recertifies every one of their tests every year. We don't do that. We suggest that it is up to our client to know when there is a change that is in need of some sort of reassessment. And we do advise our clients accordingly. So, if there's a change that impacts upon the hands of the user, a change of polymer, for example, that creates a different friction on the exterior of a pack, or a light weighting that makes the container more flexible, that changes its flexural strength, then that can, depending upon degree, necessitate a retest under one of the 3 standards. If in fact it's a minor change, then the pack can be tested under the standard ISO 13127. But ISO 13127 can only measure using linear or rotational forces. It can only measure things like torque decay, squeeze strength required for a squeeze and turn closure. In fact, it's fairly limited, and it can be, and should be used routinely to eliminate any dangers that have come around through dimension creep. But in the case of a redesign, in the case of a substantial change of material, certainly in the case of a change of shape, then a retest is required. And in fact, it is the cumulative effect of minor changes, which I refer to as dimension creep, can make a previously tested child-resistant system totally unsafe. Now, there's one other point worth making here, and that's this: that groups of children develop rapidly. We're talking in 2018. Children of 2018 can do many, many things that children in 1978 could not do. Their teaching is different. They teach by trial, by process, and by outcome. They learn to problem solve. They have transferable skills that they're taught that were certainly not available, or certainly available to a much lesser extent in 1978, 1988, 1990, 1995. So it is desirable to look critically at child-resistant packaging, at your child-resistant packs, at least every 3 to 5 years. And my belief is that child-resistant packaging should routinely be retested at 7 to 8 years, purely because children are becoming much, much more skillful in opening them.